Hello, everyone. Today's training session topic is allocating payables using the payment allocation form. In this training session, you will learn how to use the payment allocation form to allocate different payable records with payments, invoices, or cash journal lines. In a normal business scenario, when we follow the usual purchase process, the payment made against an invoice is automatically allocated by the system. This means the invoice is considered paid and the payment record becomes an allocated record. As a result, the vendor balance is updated correctly. However, in some cases, we make direct payments to the vendor without having invoice references. At the time of payment completion, no allocation document is created and no link is established between the payment and the invoice. So, the invoices remain open and the payments remain unallocated. In such cases, we need a platform to allocate these different transactions and close the vendor balances. For this purpose, we use the payment allocation form, which allows us to allocate different payable records with invoices, payments, and cash journal lines. Moving to the next slide, here are the objectives of this training session. Understand the purpose and functionality of the payment allocation form within the payment process. As explained, we have scenarios involving unallocated or unpaid invoices and unallocated payments or cash journal lines. Using the payment allocation form, we can allocate these records and close the vendor balance. Identify and navigate key fields and sections of the form. By the end of this session, you will understand the purpose of each field and section available in the form. Allocate payables accurately against invoices, cash lines, and payments. Payables may include open invoices, AP invoices, or AR memos. You will learn how to allocate these records with invoices, cash lines, or payment records. Handle partial and full allocations based on business requirements. Some scenarios require full allocations, while others involve partial payments made to the vendor. You will learn how to allocate both types in this session. Review and validate allocation details before final submission. Before creating the allocation document, users can verify all selected records. Reverse and modify allocations. You will also learn how to reverse allocation documents and understand the impact of these reversals on other transactions. Next, we have prerequisites. Since we are using the payment allocation form for payables, the user must be familiar with basic Onfinity processes, such as the purchase process and how payments are created. To use this form effectively, the user should have completed the Onfinity 100, SEM 200, and Financial 200 trainings. This ensures they understand the required configurations and can use the form without interruption. The following configurations should be available in the system. Organization setup. The organization in which you want to create the allocation document must be present in the system. Unallocated payments and invoices. There must be unallocated payable records available for allocation. Conversion rates. If multiple currencies are involved, conversion rates must be maintained so that the system can compute the converted amounts. Linked business partners. For inter-business partner allocation, business partners must be linked in the system. For example, if business partner A is linked to business partner B, then B may pay for transactions created under A. This linkage must be maintained in the Linked Business Partner screen. User roles and access. The logged-in user must have the necessary roles and permissions to access the form and the related transactions. Now, coming back to the payment allocation form. This form is used to link payments with open invoices, orders, or journal lines. In the payment allocation form, you will learn how to allocate payable records. This form contains different sections where you can allocate receivables, payables, or GL lines with other transactions. The payment allocation form is used to link payments with open invoices, cash lines, or GL lines. These payments can also be linked with other payment records. For example, an AP payment can be allocated with an AR cash payment. Overall, the payment allocation form is used to link different transactions where payments are allocated against invoices, cash lines, or GL lines. It ensures accurate adjustment of outstanding balances, supports partial and full allocations, and helps maintain clear and reconciled financial records in the Onfinity system. Users apply the payment allocation form for various business scenarios, which are listed here. We will explain each scenario one by one in the Onfinity system. The first scenario is AP invoice allocation with an AP payment. When an AP invoice is created and a payment is made against that invoice, the allocation is automatically created during payment completion because the invoice reference is available. However, sometimes a direct payment is made to the vendor without an invoice reference, so the invoice remains unpaid. In such cases, we can use the payment allocation form to manually allocate the AP invoice with the AP payment. I will now show you in the Onfinity system how this can be done. After entering the login details and clicking the login button, the system loads the home screen. Since we want to allocate an AP invoice with an AP payment, we need to open the payment allocation form. In the form, the organization defaults based on the login organization. Next, we must select the business partner. Then, we choose the currency in which we want to create the allocation. Here, we are using the base currency. If we want to allocate multiple transactions involving different currencies, we must enable the multi-currency checkbox. For this simple scenario, allocating an AP invoice with an AP payment of the same currency, we keep it unchecked. Next, select Invoice in the From field, since the invoice will be allocated with a payment. In the To field, the user can also select Invoice or Payment. There is no functional difference. It simply depends on the user's preference. Intercompany allocation. Enable this checkbox if you want to allocate transactions across different organizations. Interbusiness partner allocation. Enable this if you want to allocate transactions across two different business partners. In our current scenario, both allocations are within the same business partner and organization, so both checkboxes remain unchecked. Next, the allocation organization and transaction date are displayed. The transaction date is automatically picked based on the selected record's highest date. After selecting the relevant filters, click Search. The system loads the payment records and invoice records. Now, to allocate the AP invoice with the AP payment, select the AP invoice, e.g., invoice amount 1,190. Select the AP payment of the same amount, 1,190. The system shows the difference equals 0, meaning the payment fully covers the invoice. Before allocating, we verify the invoice. Open the AP invoice. 19. In the payment schedule, the invoice is currently unpaid. Next, verify the payment. Open the AP payment with document number shown in the form. The payment has no existing allocation, meaning it is unallocated. Now we can proceed. Click Process. The system creates the View Allocation document. We can copy the allocation number and verify it on the allocation document screen. In the allocation document, the invoice and payment are correctly allocated. The invoice shows the allocated amount as a negative value because it is payable. On the AP invoice schedule, the amount now appears as paid, and the allocated payment reference is visible. This completes the AP invoice to AP payment allocation process. Next scenario, AP credit memo allocation with AR receipt. An AP invoice represents a payable, but an AP credit memo represents a return, credit. It is considered receivable, so it must be allocated with an AR receipt. We open the payment allocation form again. Select the AP credit memo, e.g., document number 08. Its schedules show as unpaid. Select the AR receipt, e.g., document number 86. The receipt amount is 400, fully unallocated. To allocate, from the AR receipt amount, 400, allocate only 350 to the AP memo. The difference becomes 0, so we can process the allocation. After processing, the View Allocation document is created. The allocation lines show the AP memo and the AR receipt, with an allocated amount of 350. The AP memo's schedule now appears paid with a reference to the AR receipt. The AR receipt now shows 350 allocated out of 400. This completes the AP credit memo to AR receipt allocation. Next scenario, AP invoice allocation with AR invoice or AP credit memo, invoice-to-invoice allocation. Onfinity also supports invoice-to-invoice allocations. Payable invoices can be allocated with receivable invoices or credit memos. In the payment allocation form, select invoice in both the From and To sections. Click Search to load all applicable invoices. Select 1 AP invoice, 1 AP credit memo, or AR invoice. Since the difference does not automatically become 0, we enter adjustment values. Enter part of the amount in discount. Enter the remaining adjustment in write-off adjust until the difference equals 0. For example, AP invoice amount, 4,050. AP credit memo amount, 1,320. Discount plus write-off values are entered to balance the difference. Click Process. The View Allocation document is created, showing both invoices allocated, the discount and write-off amounts, the allocation completed successfully. On each invoice, the paid amount is updated. There is no reference to payment or cash because this is invoice-to-invoice allocation. The system treats the allocation itself as the method of settlement. This completes the invoice-to-invoice allocation process. Next scenario, AP invoice allocation with cash payment. In this scenario, we allocate an AP invoice using a cash payment received from the business partner. In the form, select Invoice. In the To section, select Cash Journal. Click Search to load invoice and cash line records. So this is the document number of our AP invoice. I am showing the allocation of 600 that we selected on our form. Now we will allocate this with the cash journal. The cash journal line amount is 600. This is our cash journal, and this 600 is the line amount. So this is our cash journal record. Now we will process this. After selecting both the records, click on Process, and the system will create the allocation document. We can verify the same under the allocation document. This is our record, and we can verify the allocation line where the AP invoice is allocated with the cash journal line for this amount. The impact of this allocation is that the invoice will be considered as paid, and the cash journal reference will appear on the invoice schedule. On the cash journal, the line will be considered allocated and will no longer be available for further allocations. AP credit memo allocation with cash receipt. On the allocation form, choose Invoice, then choose the cash journal, and click Search. Here we have our return memo and the receipt record. Another record of the same amount, 5,950, is the AP credit memo. Select both records. This AP credit memo of 5,950 has schedules of 5,950. Now, we will allocate this record with the cash journal line of the same amount. The cash journal line is an independent receipt record. After selecting the records, click Process, and the system will create the allocation. We can verify it on the screen. Here we have the allocation line of 5,950 with references to the invoice and the cash journal line. Both records are now allocated. The invoice will now be considered paid, and the cash journal line will no longer be available for allocation. This line of 5,950 is allocated now. This is how you can allocate an AP memo with a cash receipt. AP payment allocation with AR receipt, payment to payment allocation. In this scenario, we allocate AP payment records with AR receipt records. Choose payment in both fields and click Search. The system loads payment records. We will allocate our AP payment record with the AR receipt. Enter the amount as 50, meaning we are allocating a partial amount. The AP payment record, record 91, was previously allocated and reversed, so it is available for allocation again. The AR receipt record, record 86, has 350 allocated out of 400, so 50 is still available, which matches the amount we are allocating. After processing, the system creates allocation 99. On the allocation line, we see payment to payment allocation with references to both payment records. The impact. For the AP payment, 50 is allocated. For the AR receipt, the remaining 50 is now allocated. Since it is a payment to payment allocation, there is no invoice reference. Cash payment with cash receipt allocation. Similar to payment allocation, we can allocate one cash journal line with another. Select the receipt and payment cash journal lines, then click Process. The system creates an allocation between the two cash journal lines. Both cash journal lines now show references to each other and will no longer be available for further allocation. This is how you can allocate cash payments with cash receipts. Inter-business partner payables. Allocation. Inter-business partner allocation is used when two business partners are linked so that one purchases and the other pays. This linkage is created in the Linked Business Partner screen. For example, Van Enterprises is linked with DevCast. This allows allocation between these two business partners. On the allocation form, choose Invoice and Payment, mark the Inter-business partner checkbox as true, and click Search. The system loads the payment records of DevCast. After selecting the invoice and the corresponding payment record, enter the allocation amount. If the amount differs, the remaining part can be considered discount or write-off to complete the payment. Process the allocation. The system creates the allocation, and the invoice will now be considered fully paid. The payment reference appears on the invoice, and the payment record shows the updated allocation. Intercompany payable allocations. In this case, records belong to two different organizations. Select Invoice, then Payment, and mark the Intercompany allocation checkbox as true. This allows the system to load records from another organization. For example, invoice number 58 is from another organization and appears only when this checkbox is enabled. Select the invoice and one or more payment records. You can allocate multiple payment records. Enter the allocation amount, example, 190, and proceed. The system will create the allocation between the intercompany records. Now the records are selected, and since the difference is 0, we will allocate them. Before allocating, I am showing you the AP invoice record 58. This record has an amount of 1,190, and we can navigate to its schedule, which is not paid yet. Now we will allocate this invoice with two payment records, document numbers 11 and 4, which are AP payments. I am opening the AP payment screen. The first selected record is of amount 1,000, document 0400. This is our record, and there is no allocation yet. We will use the 1,000 amount from this record. The second AP payment record is document 11, from which we entered an allocation amount of only 190. Opening the AP payment screen again, this is our record 11. There is no allocation on it yet. Now we will allocate the records. Invoice 58 belongs to Sonic Solutions, while the payment records belong to Sonic Ventures. When processing, the system shows a message. Selected records are of a different organization than the parameter organization. Do you want to proceed? We select Yes. The allocation is now created in the organization we selected, Sonic Ventures. The new allocation record, 102, is showing on the screen. The single invoice is now allocated with two payment records, 190 from one payment, 1,000 from the second payment. So two payments were allocated to one invoice in a single process. We can verify the impact on the invoice screen. The schedule is now split, showing 1,000 paid through the first payment, 190 paid through the second payment. On the payment screens, the View Allocation tab shows 1,000 allocated from the first payment, 190 allocated from the second payment, out of 500. This is how intercompany allocation works. Next, partial allocations. In partial allocation, we allocate an AP invoice with payments, but only for part of the invoice amount. Select the invoice in the first section and the payment in the next section, then click Search. This scenario is about partial allocation, which means entering only a portion of the invoice amount for allocation. We have an AP invoice of 13,000, out of which a payment of 10,000 has been received. The remaining 3,000 is still unpaid. We don't need to enter anything in the discount or write-off fields. We directly update the applied amount as 10,000, and the difference becomes 0. The payment record we selected is AP Payment 29. This payment has no previous allocations, and the amount available is 10,000. The invoice record is AP Invoice 11, with a total amount of 13,000. The payment schedule also shows 13,000 pending. Now we will allocate 10,000 against this invoice. After entering the amount, click Process. The allocation is created, and the allocation document number is 103, which appears on the allocation screen. We can verify that the payment and invoice have been linked. Impact of the allocation. On the AP payment, the View Allocation tab now shows that 10,000 has been allocated and 3,000 remains unpaid. On the AP invoice, after refreshing the payment schedule, we can see that 10,000 has been paid and a new unpaid schedule of 3,000 has been created. This unpaid schedule will now appear as available for future allocations. This is how partial allocation works. When a smaller payment amount is received, it can be allocated partially against the invoice. Multi-currency allocation. If we need to allocate records involving different currencies, we must mark the multi-currency allocation checkbox as true. Select the conversion date, defaulting to today, and choose the invoice-to-payment conversion rate type. After refreshing, the system loads records in selected currencies. For example, there are AP invoices in Euro, and we may also have payment records in Euro or Indian Rupee. You can allocate Euro to Euro Indian Rupee to Euro Euro invoices with Indian Rupee payments, etc. Here we have an AP invoice, document 63, created in euros, with an amount of 11,900 euros, which converts to the equivalent Indian Rupee amount. There are two schedules. One is paid, and the second one, 919 euros and 70 cents, is unpaid. We will allocate this unpaid schedule using a payment record. The Indian Rupee equivalent amount appears on the form. We enter the corresponding Indian Rupee amount, e.g., 50,000, to match the unpaid euro schedule for allocation. After selecting the invoice schedule and payment record, we proceed to allocate. Part 8. P. A. I am selecting this AP payment record. The account date should match the conversion date. Only then can we allocate it. Here, it is showing the amount of 20,000, and we will allocate the same amount, 20,000. When we check the amount, the difference comes out to be 0, so now we can process it. Before processing, I am showing you this payment record, 1 of 3. This record appears here like this, and there is no allocation linked to it. Now, the allocation is between the annual payment with the Euro currency Euro invoice. After entering the amount, I am processing it now. The record is processed, and the document number for the allocation is 104. In the header, we can see the allocation. Here, we have the business invoice, the invoice schedule, and the payment record where the amount of 20,000 Indian rupees is allocated. The allocation is created successfully. To see the impact, I am showing the AP invoice screen and refreshing it. The amount is updated and the invoice is allocated. When we check on the AP payment screen, the allocation is reflected as 20,000. This is how you can allocate multi-currency records. That's all. Thank you.